Hi, this is Krista Lay.
And I'm Craig Aarons Martin.
We are the co-hosts of the SEL in EDU podcast.
Proud member of the Education Podcast Network.
Each show on the network is independently owned, and the views expressed may not represent those of other podcasts.
For the best education podcast, visit edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Mic, Voices of the EPN. We're back. This is episode 11, and I've got a great guest for you today, a longtime member of the Education Podcast Network. Today we're going to speak with the host of Education Leadership and Beyond, the incomparable Andrew Marotta. Welcome to Behind the Mic, Andrew.
What's up, Chris? My paisan from New Jersey. How you doing, man?
I am doing great. You are looking good. You are up in New York, right?
I am right on the border of New York, New Jersey, and PA. Milford, PA is where I live. My school, home of the Port Jervis Raiders, is right on the border in New York.
Okay, and you're at work today?
I'm at work, man. We're always surviving and thriving here.
Sorry to hear that. I'm at home. Just to pull back the curtain for the listener, we're having this conversation here in August, and when you're listening to it, we are at the start of the school year here in the Northeast. So you'll be at school working hard. I'll be at school wishing it was summer again, and, off we go. But things are good by you?
Great, man. I tell you, I'm going into my 21st year in Port Jervis. It's been a great journey, and just so happy to carry the banner for Port and the work I'm doing now. It's great. I've been a principal, assistant principal, and principal for those 20 years, and now I'm the director of communications and academic services. And really get to promote the district and share our stories of the great things happening. So I'm loving it.
I'm glad you love it because I love having your podcast a part of this network.
Nice.
Now, let's dive in a little bit. You gave a little bit of your background in education. Talk a little bit about or tell the story of how what you do in education led you to starting a podcast and getting into content creation.
Yeah, great question, Chris, and happy to talk it. And again, I open my show every time with a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I am proud there. I think what you're doing, bringing podcasters together, helping us kind of grow and connect, I think it's great there. So I love it.
I'm trying. It's the little bit I can do in the world.
Yeah. Well, I like it. I think it's important. So, but again, here in the summertime, I had a chance. We love watching movies, my family. And we watched One Love with Bob Marley, the Bob Marley story. And near the end of the movie, I won't give the whole thing away. We know Bob's story, but he's writing Redemption Song. And his wife comes in, he's playing it, he's singing it. It's just acoustic, it's just him. And it's a beautiful moment. And he stops and he smiles and she looks at him and she says, "Wow, Bob, that was great. When did you write that?" And he pauses, he smiles, he looks at her again, he says, "My whole life." And I'm looking at what I've been able to be part of in education, where I am, my family. The podcast is really kind of a celebration of all of that, right? The stories, the experiences. So, I wrote my books. I write a blog weekly. I love that. And it's another avenue to extend, another avenue to share and grow. But it's been all of those experiences along the way. And I just started. And as a podcaster, once you start, the stuff just comes to you. The stories, the guests, the experiences. And it really has been great. I'm up to episode, I don't know. I looked through the front windshield. To 200, so I'm almost 300 somewhere, to mid 200s.
Andrew, you do have an extensive back catalog of conversations and topics for your show. And, for you, the listener, make sure that if you've never checked out his podcast, there's a link in the show notes, which are a swipe or a tap away. You can obviously listen to his podcast on the Education Podcast Network website, but priorities here. I want you to go to andrewmarotta.com and go to his website. He's got his blog posts. He's got ways you can subscribe to the podcast. So again, there'll be a link to his website in the show notes. Mike.
Yeah, it says Mike on the screen.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Everything comes out great in post-production.
Absolutely.
Andrew, as an educator and as an education leader, what do you think is your unique perspective that you are bringing to the podcast arena? Because there are lots of podcasts about education and education leadership. What is it that makes your point of view different, unique, special, and why people should listen?
Yeah. I think two things come to mind, Chris. Number one is the power of storytelling. Everybody has a story, right? You ask the right questions, it can draw the story out of them. I interviewed Jeff Thomas from Vermont. Jeff spent a year teaching in Africa. Great story, great guy. And he talked about taking a class trip on a camel, and he's leading the camel, and the camel's guiding them or whatever. And it was a very kind of foggy day. He really couldn't see. He wasn't 100% sure where he was going. And the camel stops, right? And he tugs on him, and he tugs on him. He's kicking him. Come on, come on. And the camel goes, "Arr!" And then the leader that they were with walked up and said, sir, he explained to him, 4 feet in front of him was a cliff. Jeff couldn't see it, right? But the camel knew to stop. The camel sensed it. The camel knew it. Jeff told that story on my podcast, right? And we think as the leaders, we know everything. But the point was, sometimes you got to listen to the camel. But so back to your question, I think storytelling. I talk about storytelling a lot when I present to different groups, schools and school leaders and companies about, not only our story, but the stories around us, right? If we get up to give a presentation and we start with, good afternoon, everyone, welcome to blah, 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 versus you grab the mic, let me tell you a story. Right? And bam, there you go with the story. So number one is that. And then number two, uplifting others, more than money, more than job promotion, more than so many things in our lives. People want to be recognized and people want to be celebrated. And when you can uplift somebody else by sharing their story and promoting their story and pouring into your guest and your audience, I think it makes the world a better place. So I think it's great to pour into others there. And right, we're doing that at school, whether it's my students, whether it's fellow teachers, administrators, for me now for the district here in Port Jervis, uplifting us and making people feel better about what they're doing and their stories. So I would say it's those two things that I enjoy the most. And then also, the beyond, right? Education, leadership, and beyond. I just interviewed a 3-time All-American from University of North Carolina soccer. She won 3 national championships. She went to school with Michael Jordan. She was awesome. She was awesome, and thoroughly enjoying that. So, long answer to a great question.
I'm going to ask you, Andrew, if you could spin us a yarn. Can you share a story about a time when you were district leadership where you were instrumental in providing that motivation, that uplifting inspiration for colleagues, students? Give us an example if you can.
Yeah. I mean, within my school district?
Sure.
Oh my God. So many stories here in Port. Again, I've been here since 2005. It's been a great journey and a lot of ups and downs. Port Jervis has come a long way. But one of my favorite stories is we lost a young man, unfortunately, who had drowned. He was a young man of color, and I was on him when he was a student here, up and down, whether he got in trouble or we were celebrating something, up and down. And I had a good relationship with his family too, but that was up and down. One day the mom was thanking me for supporting him and being with him. And the next day she was saying, Andrew, you're targeting him. You're picking on him, Mr. Murata. Well, the young man graduated. He was the first one to graduate in his family. And he goes off to Waikiki. He's in Waikiki, Hawaii. And unfortunately, Chris, unbelievably, he gets knocked into the water and he drowned. It was terrible. So long story short, the kids were crying in school. People were crying. He was out probably 2 years at that point from high school. And, I didn't know what to do, right? As principal, I didn't know what to do. And so I went to the house with coffee, right? We're Italians from the Northeast,
Yeah.
I went to the house with coffee, and I didn't know if I was welcome. I didn't know, I hadn't seen the mom in a couple of years. And again, up and down relationship with the mom, the great family, the Williams family. And I get there, and there's a lot of people outside the house, and some people kind of like, oh, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Well, mom was in the doorway. It was a sad moment. They just lost their son. And she turned around. She turned around in front of all those people, Chris, and she screamed. She screamed at me in front of all those people. And here I'm thinking I'm not welcome. And oh, my God, what am I doing here? And she screamed, he loved you, Mr. Murata.
Oh.
He loved you. And she hugged me. And, it was in that moment, right? I knew as a school leader, no matter what, you just have to continue to try to do the best you can for families and kids. And whether you think they like you or not, whether they think you appreciate it or not. I thought this mom didn't like me. I thought this mom thought, I was racist or was targeting her son for a reason. But in the moment of her son's death, she said that. And I went on to have beautiful relationships with his younger brothers and sisters, and great family here in Port Jervis. And this year, Chris, or last school year, I got to interview his youngest brother who wasn't even born when this happened. And I spoke to him on the podcast. I spoke about his brother. So it was a beautiful kind of full circle moment for me. But that's a powerful story I share with school leaders that you got to fight through the negativity. You got to fight through maybe that parent that might be arguing with you, and continue to do the best you can in the best way you can for your families and your school community.
And the big lesson that I'm taking away from, and I'm sorry to hear about this young man and his passing, but it always comes back to relationships and how you build them, and that you have to build them, and how important they are in every aspect of education and beyond. Right? Mm-hmm. It's always all about the relationships that we have and build and work on.
Yeah. In the last lecture, right? The last lecture is a famous book.
Yeah.
And in the end, his last lesson was building relationships and developing trust. And certainly we have to do that in all the work we're doing.
Now, and again, there's no easy way to transition from such a powerful story, but we're gonna transition. In your podcast journey, can you share with us and the listener any major challenges that you faced when you decided to start a podcast and launch a podcast, whether, technical challenges or the idea of getting behind a mic and talking to yourself or others? Anything stand out from the beginning?
Chris, surviving and thriving is real in all we do, right? You never start out as an expert. You never start out feeling comfortable. I love the book Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. Phil Knight selling Nikes out of the back of his car at track meets. He's making the shoes in a waffle iron.
Yeah.
And, Nike turned into Nike. Again, I'm at 300 something podcasts now. And yeah, I had every one of those problems. I used to use a platform called Be Live, connecting it with my Facebook, the graphics, the images, not being able to do the show every week, no internet, the guest didn't show up. I've had everything you can imagine. And, the best advice or the best part of it, I would say, is you just got to keep doing it. You got to keep doing it. You sometimes, I'm never going to do the podcast again. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. I've done the show and I've been frozen. I've gotten sponsorships agreements and I wasn't able to produce it because the show screwed up or the guest didn't show up. All of those things. But, I used to officiate basketball, and the best coaches used to yell, next play. If the ball went out of bounds or the kid missed a shot, the best coaches would yell, next play. And that's what I would say. Next show, next guest, next thing. Because it's just part of it. It's just part of the journey. So, I'm a Seinfeld guy, Chris, Northeast.
Yeah.
You probably are too, the same, similar age. I'm listening to Entrances and Exits by Michael Richards, who famously known as Kramer.
Yeah.
and what he went through and the amount of times he got left out and passed over and all of the things, you just keep showing up and being your best self.
Was there ever a point in this journey for you as a podcaster where you came close to stopping?
Chris, I was writing books. I was, again, a Division I men's basketball referee for 20 years, transitioned to public speaker, the blog. Sometimes it became overwhelming. Like, I don't edit mine. I don't. I hit the thing, I record it, and I'm done. And I move on to the next one. But I was trying to get the link, and then I would post it on social media and all this kind. Now I use StreamYard, and now it posts right to social media, so I don't have to do that. So I did, I was like, I don't know how much I could keep this up, but I took stuff off my plate, and I made the process easier for me to continue to be able to do it, because I don't need it to be perfect. I need it to be good. Sometimes perfection stops people from being great. They want to be perfect. Well, I ain't got to be perfect. I've had those technical difficulties. If I go on vacation, I don't feel guilty about missing a week. I have to move a show. That was the other thing. I used to record it at my local radio studio. It was live on the radio. And I would have to do it every, Thursday at 6 p.m. Well, I'm a busy guy. I couldn't be available every Thursday at 6 p.m. And I had to make a studio appointment, this and that. Now I pop my computer on and I do it when I can do it. But I always try to hit the once a week. So yes, I thought about it, but I enjoy it. I enjoy the guests. I enjoy the energy. I enjoy the sharing. I enjoy the content creation. And those like opening themes. I told you the Bob Marley story. I told you the Jeff Thomas story. Those have all been opening themes for me, which lead to maybe a blog. They lead to maybe something else. So, but yeah, just keep showing up and keep doing it. Now,
on the other side of that, so obviously you mentioned a lot of good benefits to creating your show and showing up and kind of working through this through, 300 episodes once a week, the whole thing. What do you consider to be the biggest success for you in your podcast journey that you could say, because of my podcast blank?
Yeah. A few things come to mind. Chris, I use this line again when I speak. We all want to be successful at what we're doing, right? You and I want to be successful podcasters. We want to have the top rated podcast show, and that's okay, right? That's okay to have those goals, right? To be successful. We want to be. But I want to be significant, right? I want to be significant in the lives of the people we serve in my school, as well as my podcasting community. So I've had people who have never been on an interview. They've never been on a podcast. Some of those interviews, Chris, have been the most viewed, the most listened to. I've had rock star educators, edu-celebrities on mine, and they didn't get as many views as, a woman from Alabama who, there was so many people watching live. I thought it was going to break the show, but she shared it with her family, and it was awesome. So to be able to promote people maybe that haven't, wouldn't say they're edu stars or whatever. I think that's been cool. And I've had a lot of people, Chris, and I know you know this as a podcaster, reach out on what their podcast has meant to them, what they've done. But people have gotten jobs. I've interviewed assistant principals or teacher leads. And when the school Googles them, the podcast comes up, and now they're listening to them for 40 minutes in a pressure-packed office interview. They're talking. And so my friends or people that were on the show would say, Andrew, they called me out. They said, we love you. We loved you. We listened to you on the podcast, and you were phenomenal. You talked about this. You talked about that. And they got the job. I don't want to say necessarily because of the podcast, but the podcast was an avenue that the school got to see them in a different light. And that means a lot to me. And then the people that don't reach out to you, that we know you made a positive impact, right? When you tell a story or people share a failure that they've had and other people can relate to it. So those to me are some of the biggest things I take away.
I think what I kind of zoned in on at the end of your response is that saddest part of being a podcaster and content creator is that we both know that there are people who listen to us that will never email us. They'll never reach out, but they listen and they show up and they listen, but we don't even know they exist. I mean, we know they exist, but they'll never reach out. So reach out to us. Podcasters love to be reached out to.
And you know, Chris, like, you ain't getting bonuses in your job. When I refereed basketball, I knew I did a good job. 15,000 people didn't call and tell me. That's where we as educators, we as parents.
Well, now, hold on. As an official, you never know when when you're doing a good job, but you also know when you're not doing a good job.
Oh yeah. And those mistakes eat at us. They eat at us. But yeah, for sure. But you don't get the call. You didn't get a pat on the back, or you didn't get that recognition. So yeah, we're used to that. But we're going to continue to do the job, whether we get the recognition or not.
Now, in the various roles that you've had in education, is there anything that you have done in your quote unquote, your day job that was impacted, or you learned something from podcasting that you were able to bring into your daily job and your role in education?
All the time. I've introduced, professional development people, books, all the time. We're using this book as our summer leadership thing. I know we're not on video. Be the Unicorn by William Vanderbloemen. A guest came on when I asked them what they're reading. The guest said that, and I read it. I loved it. Boom, I reached out to him. He's coming on my podcast, and we read the book for our administrative retreat. So all the time, I love sharing resources and connections, and that stuff happens all the time. And you got to capture it. You got to capture these things that people say on your podcast. You got to write them down. I saw you just put some stuff in the show notes. You capture them, and it's like gold. It's like, hearing the best of the best, but that happens all the time.
Absolutely. I can't agree more.
Yeah.
Now, as we start to wrap up this conversation, for somebody who is going to go to your website, and again, that's andrewmarotta.com, or you can get to his podcast through the Education Podcast Network website, somebody might go and say, oh, he's got so many episodes. Is there an episode you would recommend that somebody starts with if they're not going to be crazy and go all the way back to episode 1 and listen all the way through? Is there an episode that you would recommend people start with?
Yeah. Chris, everyone's different. Everyone's from a different place. I love the TED Talk by Malcolm Gladwell, Choice, Happiness, and Spaghetti Sauce.
That's a good one, yeah.
That's a good one. And in the end, there's not one perfect spaghetti sauce. People like variety. I would say to scroll through to maybe see what the topic was about. Or, if you want to be a police officer and I had the chief of police on, right? You want to be a basketball official. Well, I had the, Roger Ayers on, who did the Final Four. I would say try to find someone maybe you can relate to. Or if you happen to know their name, I've been blessed to have Joe Sanfilippo on, or Jimmy Casas, incredible thing. Those guys are just the best of the best. 2 weeks ago, I had my friend on from Middletown, New York. His name is, of course, escaping me in this moment. He's from Jamaican background, right? So maybe you're an immigrant and you want to kind of learn his journey, right? He got his doctorate. He's doing all these crazy things, but he's also a preacher at his church, helping out his local community. So I would say try to find that thing you can make a connection with that might get your attention. And if not, just pick one and start.
I love it. And before we let you go, sorry, messed that up.
That's okay. Just keep going.
As we wrap up this conversation, Andrew, what does the future hold for your podcast? What are you planning? What can people look forward to in, say, the next, 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. The next episode, Chris.
The next one. There you go. Subscribe and get the next one.
I'm planning the next episode. When I refereed, I couldn't look at, the playoffs or, I'm going to get this. When I'm at school, sure, I always planned, that next assembly or that next event, but I'm looking at what the next period, the next day. I never want to get too far in front, but I'm a planner too, right? I have those things on the calendar, but I want to get that podcast right there. I want to get that podcast. This Wednesday, today is a Monday. On Wednesday, I got Dr. Michael Rossi from New Jersey. He wrote a book about the Green Bay Packers right? I just finished my podcast last night with John Conan from Montana. I love John. I love this story. I downloaded it. I put it in the thing, and now I got to move on. It's the next podcast. When I got to play right, when I refed, it was the next play. We ran down the other end of the court, and I focused on the next play. So I focus on that thing, and I'm going to keep going, keep doing the show until I don't, enjoy it anymore, or but I don't see that coming. I like it. I like the journey. I like the routine, and I like making a positive impact on other people.
I love it. And I want to thank you for taking time to be here on Behind the Mic, and above all for A, creating your show, B, being willing to be a part of the Education Podcast Network, and, being open to collaborations with things like this. And I guess I'm going to give you the last word. So we're not going to look at the next play. We're going to look at the last play. And let's pretend this is an episode of your show, and just any sage wisdom, sage advice for the educator or content creator who's listening right now. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Keep showing up. Don't let perfection stop you from being great. And we mentioned Seinfeld. We mentioned Bob Marley. We mentioned a bunch of things. The stories and the guests and the experiences are everywhere. I am scheduled through Christmas, Chris. They're everywhere. So you might be sitting there saying, well, what am I going to talk about? Well, what was Seinfeld about? It was the show about nothing. I mean, there's so much to talk about. And again, you just got to start. But you got to be organized. You had your show notes. You set the time. You have your questions. But you just start, and it'll get rolling. My friend Vito Qualia from Scranton, Pennsylvania, he just started. I'll have to connect you with him, Chris. He just started a podcast. I think it's like the word principle is in there. I think it might end in LE though. The principle, something like that. But he just started, and he talked to me, talked to other podcasters. He created a logo, and bam. So keep showing up, and the content will win.